Origin Chance, someone who's UX, and this is the Cold War Oversimplified Part 2 by the channel Oversimplified. Yeah, we saw the Cold War Part 1 yesterday. It was epic, obviously, but oversimplified version of it. But yeah, it was still fun. I like his, weird, more of a toned down joke, right? Not too extreme, but that's what makes it more fun, I guess. So yeah, let's go this one. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the Rick Sunday. There's a link in the description. Check out the cars world plays like History, Internet Historian, Oversimplified, Oli Sarcastic Production, and things like that. And yeah, let's go this one. And I don't know, it's weird with Oversimplified channel. Some video gets copyright issues, some videos don't get it. Cold War is the one who does get copyright issues apparently, so I have to put checkered box there. But if it's that big of an issue, I guess play the original video side by side. There's a link in the description with the original video, so play it side by side, I guess. And yeah, let's watch it.
By Skillshare, an online learning community where you can learn just about anything. Support my channel by signing up using the link below and get your first 2 months for free. For anyone who thinks recent US history has never been as crazy as it is right now, allow me to present to you the 1960s, extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, and the close...
Okay, all the, Russia hacked the US election and all the things that was too strong at the time. Who the hell thought that is the extreme it get, right? I mean, obviously, during the Cold War, it was even much higher. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the general knowledge.
Closest the world has ever come to nuclear apocalypse. Shocked by the CIA's intrusive methods for putting down socialism in Latin America, a certain Fidel Castro met with a certain Che Guevara in a bar in Mexico City, and the two of them decided they should grow some awesome beards and overthrow the Cuban government, which is exactly what they did. Cuba had been America's summer playground, and America didn't like seeing a communist regime being set up in its own backyard. So the US immediately began training up Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. However, as the day of the operation came closer, Kennedy wanted to conceal any US involvement in the plan. So he massively scaled back American air support, and as a result, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating defeat for America. But Castro felt there was still an impending US threat to his regime. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev had a lot of medium-range nuclear missiles that couldn't reach America, but they could if they were positioned, say, on an exotic Caribbean island off the coast of Florida. Hey, I'm a communist who hates America. You're a communist who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just gonna suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh. No, you're right. That's a better idea.
Wait a minute. I saw the extra credits video of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's the Russia who, basically talked to the Cuba, basically, that, Fidel Castro. Yeah. Russia is the one who talked to that we should put the missiles there, even though he opposed, but then later on agreed to it, I guess. Right? It wasn't the other way around.
Be still, my beating heart. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane over Cuba noticed something strange. Sir, you need to look at this photograph. You're right! That's the cutest dog I've ever seen! Sir, I was referring more to the Soviet missiles. America freaked out as they realized what was going on. They were completely vulnerable, and they had to act fast. They knew that airstrikes or an invasion of Cuba would likely mean nuclear war with the Soviet Union, so Kennedy came up with another idea. A blockade. The US Navy announced it would stop and search any Soviet ships heading to Cuba, and would sink any that did not comply. In response, the Soviet put its military into full combat readiness. The US did the same, and began drawing up plans for an attack on Cuba. Things were escalating fast, and both superpowers were getting ready for World War III. Emergency communications between the two sides broke down as Khrushchev rejected Kennedy's demands for the missiles to be removed, and for the first time in history, US Strategic Air Command moved to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 means nuclear war. The Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. A Soviet nuclear submarine in the Caribbean mistakenly believed war had already broken out, and 2 of the senior officers gave the go-ahead to fire its nuclear torpedo. Thankfully, the 3rd senior officer, this beautiful man, refused to authorize the decision. The US finalized its preparations, and yeah,
seriously though, that one guy stopped it, right? I mean, you need 2 people to agree on that. Those 2 people agree that we should attack, but there was also a 3rd guy, this guy, who apparently also needed to sign off on it. So two people already signed off on it. If this guy said, all right, fine, if you think like that, attack, that would have been a nuclear attack by a Russian submarine onto the USA. And that definitely would have caused the major war, nuclear war. But this guy alone stopped it. That is so massive, right?
Man refused to authorize the decision. The US finalized its preparations, and I kid you not, the day before the US were set to decide the day and time for the Cuban invasion, Khrushchev was like, hey, You know, if you just removed your missiles from Turkey, we'd remove ours from Cuba? Yeah, that sounds good to me. It was a bit more complicated than that, but at the last second, the two sides finally came to an agreement. Soviet missiles were shipped out of Cuba, and the world breathed one gigantic sigh of relief, except for one guy, who was bloody livid. Phew!
Yeah.
Let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my
Yeah,
presidency.
he's livid because Russia, first of all, went to the guy and said, we should put missiles in Cuba. It's good for everybody. He refused, but they convinced him. After convincing, they just said, all right, I guess we're going to back off. So obviously now America is going to be pissed at Cuba. So of course he's like, okay, you screwed me here.
Presidency? Unfortunately for him, his presidency was to end with one. Having nearly blown up the planet, a few changes were made. First, the superpowers agreed to a limited test ban treaty. Secondly, the Soviets ousted Khrushchev and replaced him with Leonid Brezhnev, who was a kisser. He liked to kiss. Both sides were deeply concerned at the prospect of nuclear war, but still, the arms race raged on throughout the 60s and 70s. US intelligence worked out that the Soviets' nuclear arsenal was not as powerful as they previously thought, but in fact, it was America that held the advantage. ABMs and MIRVs were developed, and the doctrine of MAD. If both sides knew they would be completely destroyed by a nuclear war, neither would risk starting one. But even without war, the world was already feeling the effects of nuclear weapons. In 1966, above the pleasant
Yeah, I learned in CGP Gray's video that there are so many missile silos in farms. They put that on farms, apparently. I mean, so there are already silos there today. So in the farms and things, basically in, some states, there's probably some abandoned or something like this silos right now. I mean, that's just after, right? You go in farm thinking it's just farm related, and there's a fucking nuclear missile silo right there.
town of Palomares in Spain, a US bomber collided with a tanker mid-air, and 4 hydrogen bombs fell and landed near the town below. It hasn't exploded, so I'm sure everything's fine. Whoa, boy. Hey, I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Okay. What were you gonna do today? Go for a swim? Yeah, I wouldn't. Are you breathing right now? Yeah? Yeah. I wouldn't. It took the Americans 2.5 months to find one of the bombs, which had gone missing in the ocean.
Yeah, see, the thing with the bomb is detonating a bomb is really, random in a way, right? Like anything could set it off. So those bombs falling like that could have, in theory, detonated the bomb right there, all of them. That would have been so disastrous, right? And God knows how many bombs are still lost. I mean, I remember watching some title of a video somewhere, like there are, some nuclear bombs in the Himalayas, apparently. That's just effed up.
This was the 14th time America had lost a nuclear bomb since 1950. Nobody knows how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East, Vietnam. Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into two. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Vietnam under their own regime. So the north established the National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the south with Soviet support. The US sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese to deal with the threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong, and over the next decade, the situation escalated to a breaking point. America feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice.
India? How to visualize right now. Damn, how would it have been if India became communist at that time? That's just weird thinking about it right now.
Between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops, and so in they went. From 1965, America found itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before. Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier. Did you see him? Of course not. That's because millions of young American men were drafted and sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle as its shield. It was nearly impossible to tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city of Saigon...
Seriously, and this was such a weird war in a way, right? Like all the, local people basically used the advantage of the geography and things because they knew what is what, because they lived there, hid in the jungles and things like that. So it was really hard to find and hid, amongst common people of the villages. So how is anybody like, soldiers walking by, American soldiers walking by, how they're supposed to know who's the enemy and who's just normal civilian? So it's a real weird situation, right? Like people are already panicking, like some Viet Cong soldiers can just come out and shoot you. So there's a panic situation, but you can't just shoot anybody that moves, right? Because there are civilians there. I mean, that was a real effort situation. And I love how, USA used lots of weird tactics too, like how, using the ghost tapes and things like that. They literally made tapes of ghosts, apparently of the people who died or something like that. So, all these Viet Cong soldiers and everybody just get scared and run away out of the woods. They created ghost tapes. That was just effed up.
Found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder. The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it justice in this video. But in terms of the Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many global conflicts that signaled a turning point. Under the threat of nuclear war, the two superpowers began working to make their relationship more constructive, and as a result, their ideological battle shifted away from the potential of direct conflict and more towards attempting to influence smaller proxy wars around the world.
It's weird, right? Saying USA with this sword. This sword from what? I forgot the name. Final Fantasy? Is this Final Fantasy sword? I don't know. And this is katana. Russia has katana.
In the Middle East, the Soviet Union provided aid against Israel during the Six-Day War, and then again when the US backed Israel during the Yom Kippur War. In Africa, the Angolan Civil War saw US-supported South Africans fighting Soviet-supported Cubans. In the conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia, the superpowers interestingly switched sides as regimes changed, and the US continued fighting the spread of communism in its own backyard.
I don't know why I'm imagining US soldiers and Russian soldiers are standing there. Oh shit, we changed side. Okay, I'm gonna go there, you're gonna come here. Let's swap sides.
Funding the famous Contra groups to fight the socialist junta in Nicaragua. These proxy wars were fierce enough to begin with, but superpower intervention amplified the destruction and created alarming levels of human suffering.
Look at that. 1955 to all the way to what, 1980, 1978. How many wars? Silent wars, basically, funded by, communist Russia and USA, basically.
Throughout the Third World, and in Vietnam, that human suffering was all being broadcast back home via good old television. Going into the late 60s, America was a changing nation. This became this became this, and this became this. The new slogan that was taking root, make love, not war. The majority of Americans did not approve of Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War, and in 1968, a silent majority elected law and order candidate Richard Nixon. As the Vietnam War appeared to be increasingly unwinnable, and public opinion turning increasingly sour, Nixon made the decision to begin bringing the troops home, and ended US involvement in Vietnam by 1973. 2 years later, the South fell. The Cold War was now taking its toll on both superpowers. In Russia, a huge percentage of the budget was still going to the military. People were still hungry, and they just didn't have access to the same lifestyle and goods as the West. And what did they have to show for it? They weren't even winning the space race anymore. Both sides needed to reduce spending in order to rescue their economies, and so both welcomed with open arms an easing of hostilities, otherwise known as...
I mean, it's, all the seeing how every USA was prospering and things and how they were suffering. I understand that, but about space race, I don't think that was more in their mind like, oh look at that, we lost the space race. I mean, they did send the first human in space, first rocket in space, lots of first things. I mean, yeah, they're like, we lost the race to moon, but at that time, people weren't like, oh, this is the biggest issue. I'm pretty sure it's that the overall suffering, right? If they can't get a bread to eat, I don't think they're going to be thinking about how we didn't go to moon.
Détente. To improve relations, Nixon became the first US president to visit Moscow in 1972, and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including the 1972 SALT agreement that limited nuclear weapons. Relations with China were improving via ping-pong diplomacy when the US table tennis team went on a tour of the People's Republic. However, internally, China was still pushing anti-capitalist propaganda, which led to some mixed messages. Nixon even visited China in 1972, and it was a barrel of laughs.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
Look at that shit.
You put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism.
Give me a pair.
他是不是给我一对啊？
Everything was going great for Nixon, until it was uncovered that back home he was being a very naughty boy and
Yeah.
violating constitutional protocol. I'm announcing today my resignation as president, and I'm passing the office to my vice president, Gerald Ford.
Oh yeah, he just went in front of the people, cried, and gave a speech and did this and just walked off in the helicopter, right?
Wow, you mean in America the people can actually remove their leader when he breaks the law? Why not just rule by force? Where's the corruption? And my first act as president is to pardon Nixon. Ah, there it is. After the whole fiasco, Americans decided what they really wanted was just a nice, safe guy who wouldn't cheat on them. So they elected Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna where
Look
they
at those
signed yet
teats.
another strategic arms limitation treaty. It's an honor, Premier Brezhnev. Likewise, President Carter. Please don't do that. But that's not to say there was no longer any tension between the two sides, because there was. Heaps of it. Once again, the Soviet Union put down further attempts at reform and rebellion in the Eastern Bloc. The Euro missile crisis saw new and improved classes of intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe. In 1979, the Soviets thought it would be a good idea if they had their own Vietnam and invaded Afghanistan to prevent a US-sponsored Islamic insurgency. And in response to these various crises, Olympic Games were boycotted. Conservatives were concerned that US policy had become too soft, and in 1980, they decided they wanted a president who would be tough on communism, so they elected Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came in guns blazing. Concerned at the Soviet Union's human rights violations, he
Yeah, what's with the ruse? He did that every time.
made a speech calling them an evil empire. And he also wanted to renew the arms race using technological advances in computing and lasers. He came up with the Space Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was basically a big defensive anti-nuke shield around the country. But a lot of people thought it was a pretty dumb idea. The Soviet Union perceived this shift in rhetoric as the USA getting ready for war, and they were feeling especially threatened as their relationship with their communist ally China had broken down. Relations took a big hit in 1983 when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner that had strayed into their airspace, and it looked like the world was going right back to mid-20th century Cold War tension. But then Brezhnev got really old and died and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and he was replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev.
There you
Coming
go.
into office in 1985, he was the real game
Yeah,
changer.
tell the
His
wall, Mr.
philosophy differed a
Gorbachev.
lot from previous Soviet leaders. He felt that the reason the Soviet system and economy was struggling was that it didn't allow the Soviet people to find satisfaction in their work, because they weren't allowed to speak freely and lived in fear. Gorbachev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but unlike previous Soviet leaders, he actually made the change happen. Within the first couple of years, he began the political movement for more openness and transparency, and the restructuring of the Soviet political and economic systems. And change very quickly took effect. People could criticize the government, they could enjoy Western pop culture, the media.
I mean, there are many people, right? I mean, I've seen lots of people talking about that who thought that communism was fine in Russia, basically. Communism was fine, and communism died because of Gorbachev, right? I mean, they'll really blame him, like this is all your fault, that kind of thing. Even today, you can find lots of people saying that communism, it might have survived, it might have been fine or whatever, but it didn't because of Gorbachev. They really blame him.
Media interviewed Margaret Thatcher, but most importantly, the Soviet people could now enjoy Pizza Hut. All hail to Gorbachev. He also knew that the arms race needed to end in order to rescue the Soviet economy, and a positive relationship with the West must be established. Constructive dialogue reopened and resulted in the INF Treaty, which saw all intermediate-range missiles eliminated, which was huge. Reagan's tone towards the Soviet Union began to soften, and things were looking up. But what would these reforms mean for the Eastern Bloc? For decades, the Soviets had been brutally suppressing any attempt at change. Now, would they be allowed? And that was the exact question on Hungary's lips when the Prime Minister visited Moscow. Gorbachev's response, he didn't necessarily agree with the reforms, but he wouldn't stop them either. He was prepared to let the Eastern Bloc choose its own future. This was massive, and the Hungarian leaders began planning free, multi-party elections. Poland followed suit and also held elections in June. The anti-Soviet party Solidarity won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary, the barbed wire border between East and West was removed. The Iron Curtain was unraveling. But not all Eastern Bloc leaders were happy. Notably, East Germany was still ruled by a hardline Stalinist, Erich Honecker, and many East Germans were still eager to get out. They had been trapped by the Berlin Wall, but now they were doing the math. If they could travel to Hungary, and Hungary's border with the West was loosening, could they now make it to the West? That summer, East Germans decided Hungary was the latest top holiday destination. They traveled there in droves, and using various methods, tens of thousands crossed the border into Austria and the West. Honecker was furious and blocked travel to Hungary, but that civil liberties train had started rolling and it wasn't stopping. Thousands more flocked to the West German embassy in Prague, where they stormed the fence around the embassy gardens and a temporary refugee camp was set up. In September, deals were struck to allow the refugees to travel west via train. Back in East Germany, the people were running on a civil liberties high, and they wanted their next hit. Dissent was growing. Over time, demonstrations turned to mass protest, with plainclothes secret police officers doing their best to put down the dissent, but it had grown well out of their control.
I mean, that is just fucked up, right? I mean, your ideology, communism, basically, is so fucked up that people living under you, basically seeing how the other side is doing, and they literally want to just be in that environment and trying to run away while you're stopping. I mean, clearly your ideology is already failed. If though your opposing ideology is clearly favoring, basically, all of the people are seeing that and want to live in that environment, and you have to physically stop the people from going there. You're just lost already.
And worse, the biggest demonstration was yet to come. We're gonna put all of this down by force, right, guys? Guys? Unfortunately, everyone had realized what he had not. This was bigger than them, and the entire East German Politburo voted him out of power. On November 4th, over 500,000 East Germans took to the streets of East Berlin. For many, there was still one big target left in their sights: that damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaotic announcement that the travel ban between East and West was being lifted. The change wasn't meant to take effect until the next day, and crossing guards still had orders to shoot on sight any who tried to cross. But that night, huge crowds gathered at the crossing points, and the guards were overwhelmed. In an astronomically historic moment, after decades of family separation and travel restriction, the people were allowed to pass through. East and West Berliners couldn't believe it and celebrated together throughout the night. Some even climbed the wall and began to topple it. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and a year later, Germany would be reunited. Elections in Bulgaria, a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia, and a violent one in Romania brought to an end communist authority in the Eastern Bloc. America decided it would be best if it just stayed away and let the change happen, as the anti-communist movement continued all the way back to Moscow. Gorbachev had given the people the freedom to demonstrate. Now, they demonstrated for an end to the communist single-party rule, and Gorbachev had to give in. For the first time in history, elections were held in which candidates not officially endorsed by the party were allowed to run. Ambitious rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, led a growing democratic movement. Now things here get quite confusing, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a complicated topic, so believe me, this is oversimplified, but it went a little bit like this. The Soviet Union was made up of a number of smaller Soviet republics, the largest of which was Russia. Yeltsin got himself elected the president of Russia, and began a struggle for sovereignty against Gorbachev and the greater Soviet Union. Communist hardliners were horrified at what Gorbachev was.
All right, that's just fucked up. It's like I'm in charge of Russia, and he's like, but I'm in charge of Soviet Union, which is everything. That must be really, back and forth, like who's in charge here? Who's the bigger one?
Was allowing. So they briefly kidnapped him and tried to set up their own emergency government. But Yeltsin and his supporters all gathered around the White House in Moscow and were like, no, we have a tank. So the hardliners had to concede and released Gorbachev. Wow, thanks Boris. That was a close one. No problem. And thanks to you for all the great freedom you've given us. Anytime, pal. And just to inform you, I've used that freedom you've given us to go behind your back and make a deal with Ukraine and Belarus to dissolve the Soviet Union and set up the Russian Federation. In other words, you're no longer in charge. I am. Dude.
Uncool.
So uncool. And so decades of tension and the everlasting threat of nuclear war finally came to an end as democratic governments were established in many of the old Soviet republics, and the world got along together forever after. Right, guys? Hey, this modern art thing is growing on me. Where can I learn to do that? Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community.
Yeah, people go to skillshare.com/oversimplified4 and support this channel. Yeah, OverSimplified channel is just great, right? All the content it makes is just, light, and it's just fun. All the jokes and everything is just light. There is no over the top and extreme things, which is fun. Yeah, so, Gorbachev might be the, medium in which, Soviet Union became less intense and eventually dissolved. But I feel like that was about to happen anyway, since people were living in fucked up conditions, and, uprising was basically inevitable. Gorbachev just made sure that it's not that strong. So he just from the start just lessened all the things. Otherwise, if he was still intense, like somebody like Stalin was still in power, I guess it would have been a revolution type of scenario, which would have been problematic. So yeah, people still blame Gorbachev for killing the Soviet Union, but that's not the whole truth, is it? Alright people, that was the Cold War Oversimplified Part 2. It was awesome. If you like my reaction, do not forget to like and subscribe so I know which type of videos to react to more. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description with all of my videos. Check out the cast with the different playlist. And if you want to react to any video, I guess comment down. And yeah, I'll see you next time.